Well, my name is Travis Doucette, and we're here today with Dr. Jamie Harvill. Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me.
It is great to see you. For those who don't know, Jamie is a very talented singer, songwriter, and author. He is the composer of many beloved worship songs that were included in the Hosanna Integrity Music Library, including Firm Foundation, Ancient of Days, I love that song, and Garments of Praise. And he earned a doctorate from Liberty University. We have the same alma mater, and for many, many years was a staff songwriter at Integrity Music. Jamie, it is so great to spend time with you today. Thank you for making time for
Thank
this.
you. Thank you.
Well, we just want to jump on in and get going with the history here. I want to ask you first,
Okay.
Jamie.
Mhm.
You really had a proximity to what was then called Jesus music in the early years of CCM, and I would love to just hear the story about how you came to the Lord and some of
Okay.
your earliest musical experiences when you were a young man growing up in California.
Thank you. Well, I am from Southern California, Fullerton in specifically, which is where Fender guitars were born and where Hawaiian Punch was born
Claim to
and
fames.
claim to fame. And it's right next door to Disneyland. I grew up listening to the summertime fireworks going off literally in our backyard, just above our fence. 4 miles away was Disneyland. So I grew up in
Wow.
kind of a fantasy land near Hollywood, near LA. But we were in the bedroom community called Orange County, which really wasn't as known as it is now. There was a TV show 15 years ago
Uh-huh.
called The OC.
I
But
remember that.
that,
I got hooked on
yeah,
that. It was one of those teen dramas, kind of like Beverly Hills 90210, but California style.
exactly. But let me say that was in the better part of Orange County. I grew up
Oh, okay.
in northern Orange County in West Fullerton, and it was fairly middle class, somewhat upper middle class. Some of the more
Hmm.
famous people that came from there, one in particular that influenced me musically was Jackson Brown.
Okay.
Jackson Brown went to a rival high school. He's years older than me, but nevertheless, he went to Sunny Hills High School, and there's just a lot of different names. The guy from Night Court. I can't think the judge. I can't think of his name right
Oh, I
now.
know who you're talking about. Henry
He
something.
he went to my high school.
Well, I got
Yeah,
to
he
stop and
was
ask you, what's your favorite Jackson Brown record?
actually it's an older one called I'm Alive. It's a newer one called I'm Alive, which
Okay.
has got some of the best guitar playing and sonics as far as records go. So, I'm answering a question both for the proximity of where I'm from and of a big person who influenced me a lot. Another person that influenced another group was the Beach Boys.
Yes.
They were the it was really a California myth that they really birthed and perpetuated. It wasn't as neat as it seemed, but it was magical time back in those days. Also, the Beatles, like everyone my age, when I was 10 years old, is when the Beatles broke up, but I was very aware of their records and their songs. And
Wow.
then really right smack dab in the middle of my generation was the singer-songwriter, and that
Yep.
would be Jackson Brown, who we mentioned. That would be, James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt, who really wasn't a songwriter,
Yeah.
but she was that had that folk kind of sound. So I was listening to fantastic songs.
Yeah. So,
Those
man,
guys were song masters.
they were songsmiths, and there was so much great music that came out of Southern California. So I'm sure, like as we get further into the 70s, were you an Eagles fan or a Fleetwood Mac
Absolutely.
fan? Yeah.
At the same time that I bought the Eagles' first album,
Okay.
I bought Machine Head by Deep Purple,
Oh,
and I bought
wow.
Paranoid um,
By Black Sabbath.
by Black Sabbath. And little did I know, and it's historians tell me, or have I've written, or excuse me, I've read that those two albums, the heavy metal albums, were the biggest heavy metal albums that influenced the next generation
Sure.
of heavy metal guitarists and music. So I was in the middle of folk and heavy rock and roll. So I'm electric guitar player and I'm also an acoustic guitar player, and I enjoy songs that make me feel something, that make my heart
Mm.
feel something. And so when I would sit in my room listening to, okay, Jackson Brown, Stephen Bishop,
Yep.
a lot of different guys who really wrote introspective songs, I really looked for them to tell me what I needed to think, how I needed to think, what
Mm,
I needed to do. And as I got older, I realized these guys have been divorced once, twice, three times. I imagine they don't know about love like they say they do in their songs.
sure.
And so, as I was searching as a young person, from probably the age of 12 or 13, I really hooked into the radio and listened to those songs. In fact, when I hear songs from uh, 72 and 73, I can see where my sort of palette of songwriting and of chords and melody and lyrics and all those things come from.
I'll never forget when someone introduced me to Linda's record, Heart Like a Wheel. And just Andrew Gold producing that, so many good tracks. And I don't know if you know the story behind that, but the story behind that was like, Linda was being signed and being wooed away to Asylum Records, but she owed Capitol Records one final record, and her previous
Mhm.
records for Capitol, they hadn't really rung the bell huge. They'd been okay, but they hadn't rung the bell. And then, of course, her final swan song for the record label, after she's already made this arrangement to go to another label, was just such a massive record. And that's one album that I remember from that time period.
That is one of my favorite albums from that time on was when she really rose to fame.
Yeah,
And she was not a songwriter, like I said, but
right.
she was a song picker. And
Yeah,
we talked, I heard the interview with John Chisum,
yeah,
and he became a song picker. And really, there's a talent there. She was able to do that. And I really enjoyed, not only could she pick a song, but she could put her fingerprints all over it. And
yes.
she was so gifted a singer. And it's real sad that she's
Mm,
dealing with Parkinson's disease now, and
yeah,
she can't sing at all.
I
She
know.
says she sings in her head.
Yes.
So
Yeah, that is sad.
it's a sad thing. But those days were very important to me. I lived on a block where there was across the street where there was this guy who I believe it was Wicca that he was involved in. He lived in his
Mm,
garage. He was one of the older teen sons of a big family, and so they had no room for him. He put him in the garage, and there was smoke coming out of the cracks in the garage when it was closed. The door was closed, and it smelled funny. And I went over there one day and he lifted the garage door and said, "Come on in." And somehow he brought me into his lair and he was showing me different things he was reading and listening, things he was listening to.
right.
And he showed me this book, and it was a book, a Satanist book. And
Mm,
he goes, "Take it home. It's yours. You can take it." So I took it home, and it was during the time when there was a lot of speculation. Movie houses were showing movies about Bigfoot and just about the supernatural.
hmm
And there was a big curiosity at that point. We're looking at 1993 right now,
hmm
somewhere in that realm. And I brought it home
Not,
and it
sorry, just to
scared me.
clarify,
Yes.
93 or did you mean
Or
73?
excuse me, 73.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, you're good.
Pardon me. Thank you for correcting me on that one. But anyways, it was really a frightening time for me.
Hmm
And the more that I read this little book, and I actually put it up on my shelf in my closet, never to look at it again.
mm,
But I realized quickly, even as a 13-year-old, if there is an evil in our world, then there surely must be
mm,
good or a
right.
God. And as I was growing up, I went to vacation Bible school, and
hmm
this is not the South here. This was Southern California, so
Right.
it's not as prevalent in there. So it was. I went to these meetings, and I was able to see Jesus and
Sure.
stories about all the Old Testament people,
hmm
and in my mind, I really was attracted to this in some
Yeah.
strange way. And then went to a vacation. Not a, it wasn't a vacation Bible school, but it was a neighborhood club
hmm
that had meetings in the summer, and it was really, in particular, special to me. And so when I came to that point in 1973, I realized that God was real,
Yeah.
but I didn't know him. My grandma
Yeah.
knew him. My
hmm
grandma knew him,
hmm
but my parents were when they left home, they said no to church. They
Wow.
said, Grandma made us go to church, but I'm not going to church anymore. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home. In fact, I heard others say in their testimonies, one in particular, John Chisum, very much like me. I grew up in a home that was anything goes.
Right.
I mean, anything went. My folks brought us to movies that were, I believe now, not appropriate for me to watch. So my little eyes were accustomed to things I couldn't handle.
Hmm.
By the time I was 13 years old, my dad was having great difficulty with my 4 years older brother,
Hmm.
and my dad was asking me what would he do? A 13-year-old being asked by his father
Yeah.
about
Wow.
what he's gonna do, what I should do, what I think he should do was
Hmm.
frightening to me. And my dad
Sure.
really broke down into tears at that point. Fast forward, I met a gentleman who got me into more trouble, not really more for him. He went to juvenile hall
Mm,
and was able to meet a man who told him about Jesus. When my
mm,
friend, who was just a year older than me, got out of juvenile hall, he said, Jamie, I met this guy and he has a coffee house down a couple blocks away in Fullerton. And so I said, great, I'll get some money and we'll get a hamburger. I thought a coffee house, hamburger, fries, Coke.
right.
So I got the money and I met him there on a Friday night, and
Hmm.
there were no hamburgers, there were no Cokes. It was
Hmm.
it was a house, it was a coffee house,
Hmm.
and there was records on the record player, and it was Maranatha music, and they
Okay.
talked about Jesus, and they showed me they loved Jesus. I saw it, and so Easter of that year, and it'll be, by the way, it'll be in 4 days. In 4 days, it will be 50 years. April 19th, that I met Jesus.
That's
A
awesome.
man, a man asked me the question. Nobody had asked me before. We went to a play, and it was about Jesus on the cross, and it was palpable because I could see it. It wasn't just a story, but it was real. And when I came home, he said, "Have you ever received Christ into your heart?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Would you like to?" And I said, "Of course." So I prayed and I asked the Lord to be my Lord and Savior, my God. And I can tell you this, no, and I'm not an evangelist, but I am a firm believer that God has never left me.
Mm,
And that song that we wrote, you mentioned in the introduction, Firm Foundation, I stand on a firm foundation.
yeah.
I stand with faith, knowing as I received Christ that night, April 19th at 9:05, 9:10. It's written down. I have the piece of paper. He wrote it down for me. And that's another good thing. If we can write down the date that we received Christ, if we're tempted to think that we're not, or if there's ever a time when we think, nah, that didn't happen. No, I can go back and I can see that on April 19th, I received Christ. So that night was a very important night. And I took that music, that Maranatha music that I just loved. You mean I could play Jesus music and play my guitar to it? I
Mm,
thought I was going to have to be in the Eagles or make my way to Hollywood to do that. No, it was a reality that I could actually grasp. One of the guys that were at the was at the coffee house said, "There's a place in in Costa Mesa that I'd love for you to go. I'll take you there." And
Calvary
it was a
Chapel.
Saturday night. It was Calvary Chapel in
Yeah.
Costa Mesa in the middle of 1975, April.
Wow.
And we went there, and for probably until I left town in 1980, we'll get to that, but I was going there often. Really, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa was my church. I
Wow.
didn't really understand Sunday church at that point.
Who would have been some of the early CCM artists that you would have seen, maybe even perform at Calvary Chapel or even Southern California during those early days?
Right. The Way,
Okay.
love song,
Yeah.
um, Gentle Faith, Don Gerber, their guitar player and banjo player, became a friend of mine. He lived couple blocks away from me. So as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, I'd go over to his house and he'd have all these brand new Martin guitars just lined up.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
got to play them. I had never played an excellent guitar. And when I was about 18, he sold me one of them. So I was able to have a
Wow.
nice guitar, finally, a nice acoustic guitar. Anyway, so Gentle Faith, Keith Green,
Mm,
Kelly Willard, who was a very important part of my life that I
yeah.
know we've talked previously about her. All of the artists, Sweet Comfort Band,
Hmm.
that were out. Uh, my goodness, I'm trying to think of the other ones, but maybe they'll come to my mind and I'll.
Hmm.
But all the ones that you could imagine. Everybody was my age roughly, and within 3 4 years. So a lot of teenagers, and when the songs were done, people would clap and they would point their finger in the air.
Right.
One Way, that was
One
a
Way,
big
Larry
deal.
Norman.
One
Yep.
Way. Larry Norman was one that I was able to see, and Randy
Stonehill.
Stonehill
Hmm.
was a big influence on me with acoustic guitars, singing and playing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, incredible. What an incredible journey. So you're in Costa Mesa until
Mhm.
around 1980. What happens then and help us kind of bridge the gap into what kind
Sure.
of how do you find out about integrity music and how what's the story between like 1980 and when you started to get involved in integrity music and how did that all come to be?
When I was in 1979, I had worked for a university. Was working with mentally challenged adults,
Mm,
and I was teaching them, along with very skilled people, how to manage life skills, going out to eat, how to make sandwiches, how to, fix their own meals. And I was really, I was really impressed with one of the men. His name was Jim Miller.
okay.
And I really thought, man, I really one day I want to get an education.
Hmm.
But that was tucked away in my mind. Until then, I was going to find another job. And in the midst of that, New Year's 1980 rolls around. I get a phone call from a company in Ohio that said, we've heard through the grapevine that you're a good guitar player and we need a guitar player now.
Oh wow.
Well, give me a couple weeks. No, he said, it was Friday. And he said, no, I need you to be on a plane on Sunday. So
Hmm.
I really had no time to really think about it. I had to make my decision, and my parents, and I was the first. Well, actually, my older brother had left home, but really it was a traumatic time for me and my parents. And so we just said goodbye on a Sunday afternoon with a lump in my throat. And I
Hmm.
met them in Toledo, Ohio. I met this group. This group taught me, it was a secular group with a Christian foundation.
Okay.
They taught me how to entertain. They taught me how to go and set up and they literally taught me how to discover zones in an audience and and sell is what they would call it
Sure.
to an audience. So I learned that the secular entertainment part as well as management.
Hmm.
They allowed me in the ensuing year or two to become a manager of another group. So
Okay.
I was the guy who made the plans and who got the map out, the old Rand McNally
Yeah.
map, excuse me, that you open up and you look at.
Yep.
There was no Google Maps
That's right.
back in 1981. So we traversed across the country and the world. I was able to go with this group through the USO shows
Okay.
to Italy, France, I mean Italy, Germany, Iceland, Turkey, Greece, Spain,
Wow.
Canada, Alaska. We were
A
able to
lot of
travel
traveling.
all over the world. And I got to the point where in at the end of 1982, I just was empty in my heart.
Mm.
Lord, I know that there's more to this than traveling because we were in Greece. I mean, I had a tan like I had never had living in Southern California. We were on the beach every day. My brother and was in the group at that time, and other friends, they had girls, girls, girls. But I knew in my heart I was a believer and I didn't
Yep.
go there.
Hmm.
So I came home and immediately, probably within a month, there was a group out of Mobile, Alabama called Truth who called me and said,
Yeah.
we have heard through the grapevine
That you're a good guitar
that
player.
that you're a good guitar player and we need you now. So I left and took a Greyhound bus down to Mobile. And interesting enough, that's where I live right now in the area of Mobile,
Oh, okay.
Alabama.
Did you play in
And
Truth with Steve Bowersox at the same time?
I did not, but I have played with Steve many, many times
Sure. That's
all across
awesome.
the world. But no, it was probably after that he was in it. I joined Truth in 1983 in the middle of Jesus Never Fails and the song Majesty.
Yeah.
That was a song that was recorded at in
Hmm.
Cleveland, Tennessee,
Hmm.
at the Church of God University there. Anyway, that became a the first thing I did was American entertainment. I learned the secular art, if you will,
Hmm.
of entertainment. But then on this new opportunity in Truth, I learned about spiritual presenting the gospel. I learned how one can stand before people and sing songs
Hmm.
and share the gospel. So there were two worlds that I was able to learn. And believe me, I've gleaned uh, from both. And
Wow.
Roger Breland was a big blessing to me and a big help to me in those days, albeit from the back of the bus and he was at the front.
Right.
I spent 2.5 years with Truth, and
Wow.
we were at the first couple months in Truth. Actually, it was August. My wife she wasn't my wife then, but she was in the audience in the congregation at the University of Mobile. It was then called Mobile College. She was there, and I was scared to introduce myself to her, so I had my friend Rick Briscoe introduce her to me in the lunchroom afterwards. And since then, I've been chasing her, and I still am. And now we'll be married for 39 years in just a couple months. And so she became my wife, and I decided at that time, remember that guy Jim Miller that
Yeah.
at the I said, now's my time to go to school.
Right.
So Roger Breland helped me get into Mobile College,
Hmm.
and I started there in the fall of 1985. And Brenda and I held out until the 1989 when I got my degree. It was in religion. I studied preaching, and I had a minor in music and a Bachelor of Arts. At that time, I had to find a job. So I go over to this company that had been started just 4 years before. And this is where Integrity Music comes in.
Hmm.
I moved into town around July of 1985 to be with Brenda and to go to school. That
Hmm.
is when New Wine Magazine, I believe it was right around that time that they started to become more of a music service than a magazine. So,
Mm.
and that was during that time. And so I go there and I put in my application to get a job. I would have swept floors. I would have done anything there, but no one hired. I had an interview, but no one hired me. So
Wow.
I thought, well, there's my relationship with Integrity Music. But during the time that we were there, I served at many churches, leading choir, leading worship bands, and things that weren't quite called worship bands then. But anyways, we ended up being at a new church plant and New Song Community Church in downtown Mobile. And in that church were several of the people, and you've interviewed probably all of them. They were going to this church, and I started going to this church. And somebody said, I've heard through the grapevine that you can play electric guitar. So now I'm playing electric on stage with these great guys.
So let me stop you there, Jamie.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions, just clarifying questions. So going back to your Truth days, before we come back to Integrity, what albums did you play on? Do you remember the titles of those albums for Truth?
When we were with Truth, the only people that were on their albums, except for one song, was the
Studio.
singers,
Okay.
studio players. Dan Huff played guitars.
Yep.
So copying Dan Huff helped me to become a better guitar
Sure.
player. So the vocalists in the group
Hmm.
and the horn players in the group were the ones that had the recording. We would just stay in the hotel and watch the bus and all that during that time when they were recording.
So
One of the things,
the projects around your time, would they have been like Keeper of My Heart, Celebrate the
yep,
Glory?
Keeper of My Heart.
Okay.
I think Celebrate the Glory. Jesus Never Fails was rolling. Was Keeper of My Heart. It was rolling when I got into the group. Yeah, it was already released and going, and somehow they made a number one. I don't know what that means as far as Christian radio back in 1984 or three, but it was a great learning time. So fast forward, did you have any other clarifications? Because
I
I'm
just
not
found it,
sure.
yeah, I was just finding it interesting. Like there was a lot of people involved with Truth that would later down the road become involved with Integrity. Like I think of Stephen V. Taylor doing some of the arrangements, and of course, Alicia Williamson Garcia went through there as well. It's just interesting to see the overlap of people. So many people have been, through Truth, and how that intersected with other companies like Integrity and Hosanna and all that.
Absolutely. We interweaved, our lives interweaved. Stephen V. Taylor became not just a mentor in the studio. We did do some recording. Shut Dee Do, which is a
Yep.
song that we did way back, which was a
Stonehill
uh,
song.
yeah, Randy Stonehill's song Truth did it. And that was one of the only recordings I have ever been on with Truth. Now later, they did record three of my songs, two or three of my songs, Truth did,
Okay.
but I never played on their albums that were released through Benson or whatever,
Right.
the majors. So
Sure. And
interesting.
yeah. And then my other clarifying question was, what was the initial, you talked about, wanting to be a part of what was going on with Integrity Music. What was the initial attraction? It would have just been a startup company. It certainly wasn't the juggernaut that it was by the 90s. What was that initial attraction to say that you said, I want to be a part of that?
Well, it goes back to my time with going to those Saturday night concerts.
Hmm.
It was music that spoke with a voice that was in my heart, in my soul. And I
Hmm.
thought that they were doing it well. And churches were slowly starting to take their lead. These records were coming out, and not only was it really became more of a church-wide thing, but it started out as a charismatic
Right.
movement.
Right.
So you have a lot of very, very conservative, not very emotive type churches were probably later than earlier getting on with these new songs. But I really appreciated the songs that they were writing, and I wanted to be a part of that. And I knew as I sang these songs, people really were attracted to them and they liked it. So I wanted to be a part of this movement,
Right.
and to be in the very town that I lived in was awesome. So to not get hired by them, I guess I was thinking I would never be able to write for them.
Right.
But I went to this church. This church was in downtown Mobile,
Hmm.
and there was a call that went out, and they knew I was a songwriter. I must have told them. But they said, "We have a new record coming out, and we need sort of an island kind of a song, and it needs to have a certain feel." And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, my friend from North Carolina, Gary Sadler, and I wrote a song called Ancient of Days. We'd
Hmm.
love for you to hear it." Well, I had been meeting with Garrett. He kind of saw something in me, and he took me aside one day and he said, "I really think you have talent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in you." And he asked me, "How much would it be for you to get a multi-track
Hmm.
cassette recorder?" And I said, "Well, about $200." And he says, "I'll be right back." He goes away and he writes a check, brings it back to me, and says, "Here, you pay for the other half. I'll pay for this half." So we were able to get this tape machine. When
Hmm.
Gary came, whom I met in North Carolina, where my parents had moved to in the time being, Gary came down and we started writing, and I had this drum beat, and he had some of these chords, and I had some chords too, and we wrote Ancient of Days in a little
Wow.
house. I was as poor as a church mouse. We had nothing. And when my son was kicked out of his room for that weekend because we needed to have a place to play and do our song, he was permanently kicked out of that room. He had to stay with his sister because I was beginning to write songs and record them. And so at that point, I said, "We have a song, Garrett." And Garrett took it and listened to it and said, "You sure do." And he said, "Let me just tell you, there's a part that I would, maybe change or whatever." And we did. It was just a slight cadence end
Hmm.
of a phrase.
Hmm.
So we changed it just a little bit.
Do you remember what the difference was? Like, can you recall it all these years later?
Okay. Like for instance, a musical cadence might be like, "Oh, ancient of days." Maybe that's the one that we all know, right?
Hmm.
It goes down, you know, but this we probably did, "Oh, ancient of days."
Gotcha.
We might have sang the third
Hmm.
while he said, "I think it'd be better if you sang the tonic
Yeah.
on the last note."
Yep.
It was something very basic like that. So
Do you still
when
have do you still have the original work tape for those early songs?
I do somewhere, but unfortunately, it's on a DAT tape.
Ah, gotcha.
And when DAT went out of favor, all of us sold our DAT players, you know.
Yep.
So if you have a DAT player, maybe I'll find it and I'll send it to you. So the song became one that they chose for the album. And they say that sometimes if you give a song for a recording, and I heard John Chisum say something about it, that the song might have gotten recorded, but it wasn't on the record. And I was afraid that would happen. But no, they put it on the record.
And we need to talk about that record
Yeah.
because you haven't said who
Yes.
the artist was because that was a monster record for Integrity Music. So enlighten us.
I have an exclusive for you, okay?
Okay.
And nobody has ever seen this.
Okay.
So I will send this to you and you can put it in like a 30-second, but
Sure.
it is the behind the scenes of recording of Ancient of Days.
No way.
I have it. I'm looking at it right now.
Wow. Like
It's
a video clip or a picture?
a video clip.
A video clip. Wow. That's
And
going to be incredible.
it's rough, but I'll send it to you. And it's got uh, Dr. Kenoly, and
Yep.
it's got Tom Brooks, and and I'm walking around with like an RCA, you know,
Camcorder.
camcorder. The thing was huge, and so I was able to, and it's really grainy, and the sound is awful, but at least we'll be able to get a little bit of a sound. I just found it. I looked terribly for it. The song was chosen for the album, and they said we're going to record it in Virginia Beach. And I said, I want to be there. My mom and my dad, my wife and my two children, we all packed up and drove all the way
Wow.
to Virginia Beach, which is a long way from Mobile.
Yep. It's where
And
I
when we
live right
got there,
now. It
you
was
live in Virginia
I live
Beach.
just outside of Virginia Beach. Was it
Well,
done at Regent University, that project?
it was done in cooperation with Regent, but
Right.
it was done at the oh, I can't remember, the GM Theater or something like that. It may be called something different now.
Okay.
Anyways, it was in town sort of. And we did it. My mom, when they were going through the concert, the song went on for I think 7 to 9 minutes,
Yeah.
the original. And my mom looked over at me and she said, "Oh, she got it." And
Mm.
all the racket that we did in our garage bands and all the strings my
It was
dad
worth it.
changed, it
Yep.
was worth
It
it.
was worth it.
It was only 4 years later that, or 5 years later, that my mom would pass away. So
Mm.
I was able to, my mom was able to see the beginning of my songwriting career, which really helped us to launch with our family,
Hmm.
get the things that we've always dreamed of, like own a house and
Sure.
have the things that, we were able to have a career in that way.
And I think it's
So,
important for people that are listening to know just how this was such a major project for Integrity. It was the first time that Integrity ever put the picture of a worship leader on the front cover, which was very controversial at the time. And this was the breakthrough record for Ron Kenoly. It became a best-selling album in the series, and the song that you wrote with Gary, Ancient of Days, was the breakthrough song for the record. It's the song that everybody remembers from that project. And so, and just to think of how the Lord has used that song, as you know, has gone globally and continues to
yeah,
be sung. So what a gift, what a
thank you.
treasure.
Thank you. And something I failed to mention, when Brenda and I were about to be married, we had our marriage counseling with my parents' pastor in North Carolina.
Okay.
And we had probably a full Saturday and Sunday afternoon getting together. And at the end of our time, the pastor of the church, his wife, stood over me, and it was a charismatic church. And she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "I believe the Lord is telling me right now that you are going to have songs that will minister to millions." Now,
Wow.
remember, at this point, all I had was somebody saying, "Hey, I've heard through the grapevine that you're a good guitar player." That's about all that I had at that moment in 1985. But by 1992, she had no idea that it would
Right.
take that many years, 7 years
Wow.
before this came to fruition. But it really, and then I had another person before that in American entertainment,
Hmm.
great, great man, played horns at NBC, and he was just a great arranger. And he came to me during a rehearsal and he whispered in my ear and he said, "You're going to make it one day."
Wow.
He just whispered in my ear. And when there's times when I feel maybe that I'm not as good as I need to be or want to be, I always remember those boosts in my life that
Sure.
people came to me and really gave me, outside of myself, the courage to keep going. And certainly having that song being recorded, having that man whisper in my ear, having that pastor's wife prophesy over us, and then finally having the song recorded, it was awesome. And to this day I can't believe that it has happened to me that I'm writing songs. And I had to leave California to do it,
Hmm.
which is ironic.
So, Jamie, what was it like working with Ron Kenoly and seeing his interpretation of your song "Ancient of Days"?
Well, to start with, I played guitar for his earlier stuff that he did for Integrity. In fact, there was one
Oh,
album
okay.
before. So I had already played with him, so we knew each other, and he had played at that church that we spoke of. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's a sweet guy and very supportive of his band, very
Mm-hmm.
respectful for all of us. So when he did the song, I was incredibly humbled. And so when we'd play together, after that, he would introduce me as the writer of Ancient of Days, and it was so great because not all the time do you have songwriters playing guitar for you on stage. So I was able to take a bow, and it was humbling, and especially in Asia when we played concerts over in Philippines, it was just filled to the ceiling with people clapping and stomping their feet. So it was a fantastic moment, an opportunity
I
that
love
the
that.
Lord allowed me to have. So
I love that. Well,
yeah.
a few years later, that's hard to say. A few
Yep.
years later in 1994, you wrote another song that also went to the nations, "Firm Foundation." And this song ended up being the title track of one of two projects that John Chisum did in the Hosanna Music series. John told me that you had written a song prior to this one that you were certain was going to be on a Hosanna project, but when it didn't, it became the impetus for you writing "Firm Foundation." Is that true? And can you tell us that story?
I can't remember the song before that, but I do
Mm-hmm.
remember that I wrote that Nancy Gordon, who is the co-writer, and I wrote Firm Foundation for Randy Rothwell
Oh, okay.
because I wrote it as a guitar song that really worked well with his style.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to record it, so it was open for recording, and John Chisholm was able to record it. Speaking of John Chisholm, after I had that success with Ancient of Days, he took me to lunch in Mobile, and after we ate, he slipped an envelope across the table, and I thought, "Wow, this is interesting." And I opened it up, and it was a check for a sizable amount of money, and he said, "We'd love to sign you as a an exclusive songwriter."
Wow.
And being a student barely out of college with, a really we were poor, and to
Mm-hmm.
have this amount of money was a blessing, and it was also a dream come true. So from that point on, I signed the contract, and I was exclusive songwriter for Integrity Music. So for John himself to want to record one of our songs was a blessing.
That must have
Yeah.
been a dream come true. Tell me a little bit too, before we get into Firm Foundation, tell me a little bit about who Nancy Gordon is and what your relationship to her is and how you met her and how that all came together.
Nancy was at a church. Of course, I told you earlier that I led worship or
Mm-hmm.
leading songs at other churches. So when I got this job at a church in town, and this lady was there that they had appointed to be the piano player. And so a couple rehearsals happened with the choir, and we did a couple services. And then I looked over her shoulder, and there was a book on the piano. One of the songs we were singing was right next to another song, and her name was on it. And I
Hmm.
said, "Nancy, what is this?" She says, "I'm a songwriter." And she says, I've written songs that were recorded by Integrity Music."
Hmm.
So I give her a lot of credit for giving me that impetus to get out there and start writing songs. Claire Cloninger was a
Oh,
friend of
wow.
hers. And so
Wow.
Claire invited me. One time she said, I've got to go up to Nashville to go to a Christian for word a banquet at Christmas time. Would you mind going with me? My husband doesn't like me to drive by myself. I said, yes, ma'am. So we drove all the way up to Nashville to this banquet, and all the way up and all the way down she was telling me everything I needed to know. And one thing she told me, she said, Jamie, I've heard your songs, I like your songs, but the problem with your songs is you have too many songs in your songs. She said, you've
Mm.
got to pare it down and make your songs clear, concise, easy to sing, all the things that I would later learn and really put to use when I became a writer for Integrity Music. So I would say that Nancy Gordon is really important in me, not just as a friend, an encourager, but as a person who would introduce me to right to the heart of Integrity Music and to Claire
Wow.
Cloninger.
Claire Cloninger, what a classic writer. Her two of my favorite songs of all time are "You Gave Me Love" and "Friend of a Wounded Heart."
Yep.
And man, what a lyric. So when you look back at Firm Foundation, do you have, like, I know that was a long time ago, but do you have any recollection in the writing room of being able to say, okay, well, it started with this, or Nancy had the idea for this part of the melody, or I came to the table with this lyric, and then Nancy added this. Do you have
Mhm.
any recollection of who was contributing to what parts of that song?
I do more the mostly it was let's write a song that's easy to play with a single guitar. So
Okay,
that was me. I had that. And but when we got down to lyrics, there was something that was just now going on with worship, and it was the worship leader singing his part and then the congregation answering,
right,
singing a part,
yeah,
answering. So that was very much a part of us writing this song. Let's get the congregation involved, which, by the way, you and I having studied, gotten our doctorates and studied all these
yeah,
things, we learn that the number one voice in our congregation
mm,
is not the singers with microphones.
right,
It's not the worship leader. It's the congregation.
that's right,
So one thing I did learn was that in integrity taught this was that you need to get your congregation to sing. So that's what our heart was. We wanted to, I have a living hope. And then the audience or congregation, I have a living hope. I have a future.
man.
God has a plan for me.
That's so great. And you know what? It reminds me, Don Moen says it this way when he talks about the congregation singing. He says, give them a reason to stand.
Yeah,
And I think that is
that's
just
good.
so great. And you know what? Now that I hear that you wrote it for Randy Rothwell, it makes me think of, the template for some of his other songs, because he had a song. Do you remember? I belong to a mighty God. I
Absolutely.
belong to Jesus. Like Firm Foundation, very much you could see it's a similar template for that call and response. So I can see how
Absolutely.
writing it for Randy, would have made sense.
Absolutely.
That's so great. Wow. So John Chisholm records the song. It rings the bell again. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about how God's used that song through the years.
Well, that song was an introduction for me to the company. They knew that at that point I could write songs on demand. It's kind of like a dog that'll roll over on command. But I could, and in fact, they came to me soon after Firm Foundation was written because we were in the Philippines. Again, I was able to travel there with Don Moen. I played guitar for Don Moen for several years
Okay.
and did his concerts. And with there was a Don and Ron tour that we were on,
Don
but
and Ron.
that was another situation. This time we were in the Philippines, and everyone in the congregation 10,000 people were singing Firm Foundation. And I
Wow.
think it dawned on some of the people that were up in the company saying, we need a song for this new thing that Integrity was involved in, and it was called Women of Faith.
Ah,
And so
gotcha.
they called me, Chris called me and said, we would love for you to do this.
Springer.
It's not Springer, Chris
Thomason.
Thomason,
Yeah.
sorry, Chris, called me and said, I think you could do this. So why don't you take this? lyric that was already written by the gentleman who was in the in talks about doing Women of Faith.
Mm-hmm.
He's a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. And anyways, he had lyrics and ideas. And I just went home and I just sat down and I said, "We are women." Okay, and I'm a guy, all right. We are women, women of faith. And we just started to sing the chorus and it just came to life. And I did a demo for it and they accepted it and it became the song that many of us know, many of the
Wow.
ladies who may be listening knew that song. Well, the guy was Jamie Harvill. He wasn't a girl. He was a guy, just so you know.
And Jamie can be a
And
girl's name, so they might have been
Jamie can,
mistaken.
it could be a girl's name too. And so there were no pictures or anything. So,
Right.
but now you know that's how it
It
happened.
was you. It was
It
you.
was me all the time.
Well, we've talked a little bit about how you were not only just a songwriter for the company, but you were playing on a number of projects. Like I was kind of
Yeah.
looking through your name on Discogs and seeing all the
Yeah.
different projects that you played on. I'm just curious, what memories do you have of the musicians and singers and producers that you worked with when you weren't, for projects that you maybe weren't even writing for, but what were some of your memories of those projects that you played on and some of those musicians and singers that you worked with?
Oh, the biggest memories I have when we had group singing where we got together and many of us were around the microphone. I mean, it was a who's who, and I was not the who's who, but
Right.
it was the who's who that were around that. Kelly Willard,
Mm.
uh, Lenny LeBlanc, just a bunch of singers. And here I am singing with these guys. And just between takes, how professional they were. I think I told you about Kelly Willard, who
Hmm.
she would sing her take perfect on cue, timing, everything great and she would just lay down and go to sleep. I'm talking for 30 seconds. And then when it was time to get back to the mic and to do the next phrase, she was up and she was ready to go. But
That's
it was
so
just
great.
fun. The studio is a bunch of funny people. I mean, everybody has a joke. Everybody, it's a crack up. And by the time you're done that night, you're exhausted because you've laughed. I laughed so much. So one of the other great memories was of a time when Integrity Music started a new continuity program called Scripture Memory.
Sure.
And Ron Davis was for them at that time. He had moved to Mobile and he
Hmm.
started the studio with a great SSL board and just incredible gear. It was there in Mobile. They didn't have to go to Nashville. And so a lot of the records were mixed there. Well, sometimes you'll get to the point in a mix and you'll go, you know what? Something's missing. Because they would record in LA or Nashville. And here Ron is with this and so he called me up. He said, "Hey, Jamie, come over. I need to do some vocals." And so Ron and I would get out there. He'd do a remote right there with the microphone in the studio, and we would do background vocals. We did on several records, and
Mm.
it was a blast. And Ron is to this day a fantastic guy who has moved back to the West Coast, but a wonderful, wonderful mixer. But those are some of the great. And then I played guitar. I might have played guitar on John Chisum's record. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Um, Don Harris had me come
Oh
in for
yeah.
some sessions.
Hmm.
And then later in my career, Stephen Taylor and I got together and I played guitar on Veggie Tales. I played guitar on records that I can't even remember, just so many. And we wrote songs and did all kinds of stuff together. So those are some great memories.
That is incredible. I'm looking at the credits here for Firm Foundation, and you did play guitar and you sang background vocals on that project. So that's
Well,
awesome. Well,
thank you for seeing that.
you know, um, you talked about writing Firm Foundation originally for Randy Rothwell, and it's interesting in the early '90s there was this move. Tom had set the bar with production, but it was very piano based because, as you know, Tom Brooks is an incredible piano player. But there was this shift that I saw in the early '90s, and for sure was influenced by folks like you towards acoustic worship. And yourself, Paul Baloche, and others did
Yep,
lots to forward those things. And there were three compilations that kind of were geared towards songwriters in the Integrity stable that maybe didn't have a Hosanna project. One of them was called
right.
Revival Fire. One of them was called Rock of Ages, and then the third one was called Because We Believe, which was centered around another big song that you had written. And I just want to hear what your memories are of being involved in those acoustic worship projects and that song, Because We Believe.
Well, they had faith in us as songwriters and performers. Obviously, all of us could play somewhat of an instrument and sing somewhat. I remember most of all during that Because We Believe recording, there was a penny whistle solo
Mm-hmm.
um, in that, and there was a guy who was a huge producer. If you could, what's this song? I can't remember the ones he's produced all kinds of incredible songs.
Okay.
Look up Pete Kipley,
Okay.
and he was in the back of the place where we were recording, and he was practicing his Because We Believe penny whistle part, and you could hear it through the wall. And somebody, I think, had to go back and tell him, Pete, you've got to just don't play anymore. So from then on, I called him Piccolo Pete. I don't know if anybody else did, but he was that was one of the funniest. He's a funny guy, and he's produced, oh my goodness, so many great songs, and you can mention in a minute, but anyway, if you can. But he was there, and we stood, each of us had our own 15 minutes. We'd stand in front of this incredible band, and we'd play our song, and they would take down with number charts. These were Nashville Pickers.
Yep.
This was in Nashville, yes. And so the Nashville Pickers took down the songs, and then they were able to, from that point on, make up their parts. And when it came time for us to come on, we did our song. So what you hear, Because We Believe, is what you hear. There was no real big corrections on that. I wish they'd have corrected a little bit more, but that is what it is. I played the acoustic live on it, and
Really? Okay. And they kept
yep.
it.
Yeah, I think they sent me a really nice Avalon preamp where I had a very basic studio in North Carolina, and they recorded it. I was able to re-record my acoustic there. But I wrote that song with Nancy Gordon, Because We Believe. And so another great song for the church to sing, um, to hear me introduce the original and then as a leader, and then have them sing it back, was very much the same technique.
And this project was such a cool project because it featured songwriters, some of which had done projects for Hosanna, or some composers pardon me, artists that had written songs for projects, but you maybe had never, like yourself, had never known
Right.
them on a project. But like you're in great company here. There's Daryl Evans, there's Bob Fitz, there's Paul Balash, there's Ed Carr. There's just a lot of great singer songwriters on this project. So if you've never heard it, it's called Because We Believe, acoustic praise and intimate worship, and it came out in 1997. And you definitely, if you haven't heard Jamie's song Because We Believe, you'll definitely want to check that out. But what an incredible project. At the end of the decade, so we're in this magical decade of the 1990s where worship just really kind of came into its own. There was this monster, probably out of every project that we've talked about. I don't know that there was one any bigger than this. And me and you've talked on the phone. When this hit, there was just something in the air that people were just fascinated with Celtic music and all things Irish. But the
Yeah.
year is 1999, and uh, you know, Chris and Don and Mike, they've managed to find this Irish worship leader named Robin Mark, who's known primarily, initially at least, for a song called Days of Elijah. And in 1999, they record this juggernaut project called Revival in Belfast. And this project hit just at the right time, and the Lord just seemed to blow wind in the sails of so many songs on that project. But your song that you wrote by yourself opened up the project, Garments of Praise. And I know that there's an important story on how this song came to be. So can you share it with us?
Well, in 1997, up until then, my wife and I and our kids lived in Mobile, all from 1985 all the way up to this point. My mother passed away, as I mentioned earlier. We moved to North Carolina to be with my dad. By this time, we were there about a year and a half, and I was in the basement of this house where I set up this little studio. It was during the time I was still grieving my mother's death. And I was also grieving other things in life, some failed personal things, or maybe not. There were several things going on that created a grief in
Sure.
my heart without getting into any details, except for my mother, really.
Hmm.
And and as I was thinking about it, I read put on the garments of praise scripture, and then I just thought, what wouldn't it be interesting to have a song that started out mournfully, but then, as David often does in the Psalms, he turns the song from a lament, and then he starts to speak as if he was healed or as if he was rejoicing in spite of his grief. And so the song is put on the garments of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And so it's very, very mournful. But then at the
Hmm.
second part, we do that little jig, and that's
Hmm.
what I call it. Maybe it's not. Sorry, Irish aficionados, but music aficionados. But I wrote that on my acoustic guitar.
Mm.
I had that in the demo, so everything was there.
Right.
And I had no intention of writing a song for Ireland or for anything other than this is what I was thinking when I wrote it. And when
Mm.
I turned it in, it was the perfect song. So fast forward a couple months, maybe a year, and I'm not only am I with Integrity Music playing, doing conferences and playing with them, but I'm also now with Maranatha, which was a dream come true. Remember, I was 15,
Right.
looking up on
Right.
that stage, thinking, Lord, maybe
Yes.
one day I can do. Well,
Yes.
at a certain point of time, Paul Blosh invited me to be a part of his band, and so was playing guitar for his band, and we were at a conference for Maranatha Music, and I was in the car driving with Kelly Willard from LA to Arizona. I was in the car with Kelly Willard and the guys from Koinonia, the rhythm
Mm.
section guy,
Mm-hmm.
the drummer and the keyboard player.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time she says, I heard this new song, Jamie, and I think it's great. I really want you to hear it. And she's buttering it up. And then we get to this gas station, filling up the gas and getting Cokes and stuff. And she turns it on, and there it is, the opening for this record. And she says, Jamie, that's the best song.
Wow.
And
What a compliment. Yeah.
For Kelly Willard, who was one of my uh,
Heroes. Yeah.
heroes,
Yeah.
it was we're talking heroes back in the mid 70s into my
Sure.
time with Truth. We used to listen to Psalms, hymns, and spiritual song record that
Yep.
she recorded, which is
Yep.
one of my favorites, on the bus on Truth. And so to have her say that to me directly has just it was a delight. When I was growing up, I loved all kinds of music and even country music. And at one point, we I loved it. At one point, I got this album called Fire on the Mountain.
Okay.
It was by Charlie Daniels
Oh,
and
yep.
his band, and he did a couple of hits on the radio that were crossovers. Well, by the time I was able to move to Nashville, and now I'm jumping ahead, but for the moment, I was able to play with Charlie Daniels. I was able to play with
Mm.
him, and
Wow.
some of my heroes and some of the songs are. I played with the players that played on the song "Bluer Than Blue," which when I was growing up in high school, that was a big, song of singer-songwriter song. But anyway, I was able to play at this point with some of my biggest heroes that were in the Christian music industry.
Wow.
Yeah,
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely
yeah.
incredible. So we get, into the 2000s. Can you share a little bit about how your time with Integrity as a songwriter came to an end?
I started writing for them, as you said. I think you mentioned it was 92 or 93.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, but it was around that time. And it got to be around the year 2000
Mm-hmm.
when when they started bringing us on as songwriters. I think somebody has mentioned it. Garrett Gustafson
Mm-hmm.
has a really good timeline on how they came to the point where they didn't find old songs. They had to create their new songs,
Mm-hmm.
right, for their projects.
Right.
And they were doing at some point they were doing 100% of their own copyrights.
Right.
That's when we came along
Gotcha.
as songwriters to create material. And it got to the point in 2000 when I think when I started, that where people were buying records every 8, 6 weeks. I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember what it is. It was 200,000. So if you got a song on a record at Integrity every 6 weeks or whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
you were able to really be blessed financially and
Yeah.
then get your song in CCLI, which would
Sure.
create that whole other stream of income. But at this point in 2000, it started to wane and
Mm.
they started to think about other things. So at this point, the songwriter, worship leader became the person to write the material. And
Gotcha.
so I kind of saw the writing on the wall
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that it was probably best. I would rather leave than be asked
Right.
to leave.
Sure.
And a few others felt the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left and I just became an individual songwriter. I have my own publishing
Mm-hmm.
and with BMI, Paths of Peace Music. It was a great time with integrity because you knew when you wrote a good song, it would be recorded.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
now, as an individual, you have to hustle, if you will, to get your songs noticed,
Yep.
to get them. And you also have to have other writers that you have to meet with. So by that time, we moved to Nashville, and I met with a lot of writers and wrote
Mm-hmm.
a lot of songs with other individuals. And other things in my life came up, and desires, and the Holy Spirit let me know that it was time for another change.
Mm. And what's really interesting is that since your time at Integrity, you've mentioned you've continued as a songwriter, but you've also authored a handful of
hmm
books. You've
hmm
completed a doctorate,
hmm
and
hmm
you continue to serve in your local church. What are the things that grip your heart today?
Mostly, it's when I was growing up, the people that whispered in my ear, you're gonna make it. The
Sure.
people that encouraged me were my mentors, the people I looked up to. And if I had a desire, I would want to be that voice in the wilderness for someone.
Yeah.
Be it in a personal relationship. I'm a worship leader at a church here on the Gulf Coast of Alabama now.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to be able to, maybe not even saying anything to somebody, but being an encouragement to someone. And when Brenda and I were in Nashville, we knew it's almost like the Lord takes your nest, right? And the nest is lined with fur so that the birds are comfortable. And then all of a sudden the Lord takes away this fur around the
Yeah.
nest and you start to feel the twigs
Yeah.
against your flesh. And so it makes you want to jump out of the nest. There was a
Mm.
time where Brenda and I felt compelled to jump out of the Nashville nest and to move back down to Mobile, where I knew that I was going to start my master's degree. And at the same time, Roger Breland from when in my truth days called me to come down to teach at the now called University of Mobile.
Right.
And I taught there just a semester ago
Mm-hmm.
there. Now, many years later, almost 40 years later
Wow.
from when I graduated,
Mm-hmm.
um, 40 years since for sure since when I started. But anyway, it has led us to this point in our life to where I am now have my doctorate in just teaching online at Liberty University and having a great time doing it. I've kind of got other duties there with Liberty University that help me to create courses. Actually, at this point, more than that is to help fix courses. I'm
Mm.
a course fixer.
CF for short, course
Yes,
fixer.
course fixer.
You
But
know,
that's what and I'm happy and where we are now in our life, we're grandparents. Brenda and I will be married for 39 years in December. We've got,
congratulations.
thank you. We have our two kids that were with us with Ancient of Days, and they're grown-ups with married. My daughter has two kids, and my son has four, and he lives in Nashville. And Betsy, my son's Josh, and Betsy lives uh, near Jackson, Tennessee. So uh, my son is at a church now called. He's been there for many years. I was there as a worship leader, but it's called World Outreach Church in Murfreesboro, and he's doing a great job.
That's great. Couple of questions as we wrap up today, Jamie. I've so enjoyed this. I'd like to know when you think back at all the people that you interacted with at Integrity, songwriters, producers, performers, who are some of the
Mhm.
key figures that made an impression on you, and how did they do it?
I would say first and foremost at Integrity was Garrett Gustafson.
Mm,
He was very integral in my getting started. He invested in me. He had skin in the game,
yeah,
and I appreciate that. Another is Marty Nystrom, who
yeah,
was, in fact, the guy who was the song development manager during the time when I was starting with them. And then
sure.
John Chisum came
Yep,
after Marty left.
yep,
And I would say John Chisum is very important to me, and I'm grateful for him. I mean, not just recording my song those many years ago, but now he's still using the song. He's got a new version out that I'm
yeah,
sure that he has told you about, and probably
yep.
even
I've heard it. It's
anyway.
great. Yep.
It's a good. I appreciate it. Those three, I think, are probably the most personable. And there's another guy who really is a comedian, I think, at heart. His name is John Stanko,
Okay.
and kind of ornery. And John, you know who you are. But he is funny and he is witty, and he would teach the main courses for the pastor leaning people in our conferences. And
Okay.
it was such, he really helped me to hone in on my purpose and what is my purpose in life. And so I thank John Stanko for that. Those are four people that I can for sure. And Nancy Gordon. Thank you,
Yeah,
Nancy.
yeah. You know, your season at Integrity produced some global songs that, as you know, are still sung today. And the 1990s were such a significant part of modern worship. What do you think Integrity's role was in equipping the church? And as a staff songwriter for the company, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of that I was able to be sort of a Forrest Gump of worship, where I was able to be in Southern California in the middle of the Jesus movement, and I was able to be a part of that.
Yeah,
But then another movement came sort of out of that, but concurrently was Integrity Music that grew up out of a little town called Mobile, Alabama.
yeah,
It's the Bethlehem. It's not Nashville. It wasn't LA or New York. It was Mobile, Alabama, and God used this town as a birthplace for this what God would do. Another thing that I think is very important to remember is Promise Keepers helped it was between Integrity Music, Promise Keepers, and Maranatha. Promise Keepers was able to bring pastors into their live events, and these songs that they sing allowed very conservative Southern Baptist
yep,
pastors to say, I want to do that in my church. I want to feel like that in my church. So Promise Keepers needs to be mentioned as a between um, entity, I should say, that helped to bridge the gap between the charismatic and the conservative Christian so that Baptists would one day sing the songs that we all sing today.
yeah,
So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being a part of Maranatha and Integrity Music. And now it's a moment for individuals, for my own band. And I wouldn't want to get off this without telling you that Father's House Band is
yes.
the band that I'm producing albums with, and this is our second project that we're having out called Majestic, and it's just fun to write songs, to play them and sing them and produce them. I love working in the studio. I
Mm.
love doing from the beginning to the final mastered product. I love it, and I'm learning about promotions now. That's a whole nother ball game that a lot of us old timers have to learn.
Well, you know, I want people to go and check that out. I'm sure they can find it on Spotify,
Yeah.
you know, YouTube, Apple Music, Father's House. And what's
Father's
the
House, fathershouseband.com. And
okay?
that'll get you to at least our site, and then that'll take you. And we're releasing our songs. See, we used to release full albums, but
Right.
now we're releasing one song per month with a video. So so it gives
Love it.
people a chance to digest your music. And probably a year from now, we will have released our last song. So it's kind of exciting. It's different,
Yep. That's
but
incredible.
it's the way it is nowadays.
Jamie, I've so enjoyed this. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, but most of all, thank you so much for sharing your heart through your
Thank you.
songs. Man, your songs have shaped me, and I know they've shaped millions of people. And the
Wow.
Lord has used you really greatly. And man, I enjoy our friendship, and I
Yep.
appreciate you, brother. And thank you
Yes.
for doing this today.
Well, thank you. I want to tell you this. I want to tell your listeners that when I was researching for my papers and thesis and all those things, your name popped up, popped up, popped up. So you have some great writing out there, some academic writing that I'm sure many pastors don't know about. They just need to Google it and read it because you have some great research out
Well,
there that was very interesting
well, thank you. I know that we're kindred
for
hearts in
us.
that, but God bless you,
Yes.
Jamie, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, brother.